Hi and welcome to Notes and Notions. Some of my readers said that they would enjoy hearing my stories in audio form, so here I am, giving it a shot. Let's call this an audioblog, if that's even a real thing. Today I will be reading my text, How Not to Plan a 3,000 kilometer Journey. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Traveling solo sounds cool, doesn't it? The thrill of independence, the I can conquer anything mindset. It all feels so empowering. That's what I believed as well, until I actually had to do it. It was 2008 and I was on my way to an international youth camp in Portugal. The trip promised an adventure focused on archaeology in the Serra da Estrela mountains. My friend was supposed to come along, but some last-minute visa issues left me with two options: cancel the trip or take on a 3,000 kilometers journey across Europe by trains. After working 3 part-time jobs to fund this adventure, canceling wasn't an option. So, solo it was. I bought my train tickets, printed out timetables, and held onto my map of Europe like it was my lifeline. Here's the thing, there's no direct train from Serbia to Portugal, and back then, smartphones and Google Maps weren't a thing. I spent days studying train schedules, mapping out every connection and planning each transfer carefully. The plan seemed solid, at least to me. Catch the night train from Belgrade to Ljubljana, then hop through Venice, Milan, Paris, and finally Lisbon. I even thought I was clever for scheduling most of my journey overnight to avoid hotel costs. Just sleep on the trains. Foolproof? Right. I set off with a mix of nerves and excitement, arriving bright and early in Slovenia around 10 a.m. My next train to Venice was supposed to leave in 1 hour. Easy peasy. I walked up to the ticket counter, ready to grab my seat reservation, when the woman at the counter gave me the kind of look you reserve for a stray cat who's just wandered in. "Oh honey," she practically said with her eyes, "didn't you hear? Italy is having a 1-day train strike. No trains to Venice until 2 a.m. in the morning." Great. I'd barely begun and my carefully crafted plan was already toast. Luckily, I had a friend in Slovenia who let me crash at his place. But at that moment, my printed timetables were nothing more than fancy, useless scrap paper. I threw them away, took a deep breath, and decided to just go with the flow. Forget planning. I'd get on whatever train would get me closer to Portugal, night by night, station by station. How hard could it be? I thought. Famous last words. At 2 a.m. I got on a train to Venice, running on caffeine and adrenaline, the kind of confidence that only comes from being completely sleep deprived. The coach was packed with 6 English girls who were doing a similar train trip through Europe. We chatted and laughed, but let's be real, none of us got any sleep that night. By the time I actually set foot on Venice, I was a bit of a zombie. And of course, I managed to get off at the wrong stop in Venice. I was a hot, tired mess, dragging my suitcase back to the main station 1 stop away. I finally made it, only to find that my next train to Milan was leaving in 30 minutes. At least one thing was going according to plan, even if my brain was on cruise control by this point. I'd been traveling for over 36 hours, barely slept, and ended up in a never-ending line for a ticket reservation, staring at the departure board as if it held all the answers to my problems. I had 2 options: take a train to Paris in 5 hours, probably the smartest option, or catch a series of shorter trains to the French border. After the fact, it was obvious that Paris would have been the smarter choice. I stood there, holding my map, trying to trace my finger over every town that might get me closer to Portugal, as if this wrinkled paper map somehow held all the solutions. I could practically hear my dad's voice in my head reminding me to just find the nearest airport and fly back home if things got too tough. And let me tell you, that idea was sounding pretty good. I'd made it only 1,000 kilometers and still had over 2,000 to go, and I already felt like I'd been through the ringer. The more I thought about turning back, the more my heart sank, and before I knew it, a couple of tears were sneaking out. Right then, the woman standing in front of me turned around. She gave me a knowing look and handed me a tissue. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. It was a strange, gentle reassurance, like the universe is saying, "You've got this." I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and told myself to keep going. Whatever happened, I had to keep moving. With a bit of a renewed determination, I jumped on the next train to Torino, then from there on to Ventimiglia, a little town on the border with France. When we arrived, I noticed a crowd running to catch another train that was just pulling in. I didn't have time to check the destination, but I figured, when in doubt, follow the crowd. Once I was on the train, I asked the nearby passenger to confirm it was going to Nice. Luckily it was. When I finally arrived in Nice, it was already evening. I dragged myself up to the ticket counter, slumped over and said exhaustedly, "Here is my ticket, just give me the first seat reservation for any train to Spain. Anywhere in Spain, I don't care." The attendant raised an eyebrow, clearly thinking I lost my mind, but he checked his screen and said, "You're in luck. There's a train leaving for Irun in an hour and a half." Sold. I bought the ticket, then took a look at my map, trying to pinpoint exactly where I just agreed to go. It turned out Irun was a border town on the edge of France and Spain. Perfect. Close enough to progress. When I finally got on that train, I didn't have to think twice. I hugged my bag, lay across 2 seats and fell asleep almost instantly, oblivious to the rest of the world. When I eventually woke up, I was disoriented, blinking at the faint morning light streaming through the windows. The train was still moving. At that moment, I wasn't sure in which country I was anymore. All I knew was that I was somewhere, somehow, a little closer to Portugal. Spain at last. Around noon, we finally rolled into Irun. I hurried to the ticket counter, sure I was just one quick reservation away from Portugal. "When is the next train to Lisbon?" I asked with a hint of triumph. The reply? 10 p.m. A 10-hour wait. In Irun with little to do. Perfect. Behind me in line was a woman with her 4-year-old daughter, who must have noticed the disbelief and despair written all over my face. She smiled and said, "If you don't want to wait here all day, you could join us to Salamanca. It's a bigger city, there's more to do, and it will help pass the time." So I agreed, partially because I had no better option, and partially because she and her daughter felt like the closest thing I had to a plan. We spent an hour at the station, sharing coffee and small talk as I clutched my bag like a lifeline. I was still dizzy from the 3 days of train seat sleep. She was originally from Salamanca, but she lived in Nice, and she was taking her daughter to visit her parents. On the train, I ended up spending most of the several-hour trip entertaining her daughter, who spoke French. My French was, somewhere around 4-year-old level. The girl would chatter away, I would nod and mumble a vaguely French phrase. It was a language lesson and exercise in patience rolled into one. After 8 hours on the train, we rolled into Salamanca around 9 p.m. As I stepped onto the platform, it hit me. I had no idea if any trains to Lisbon actually stopped here, or if I was about to spend the night on the station bench. By now, I was exhausted, grimy, and starting to question every choice I'd made since leaving home. As we said our goodbyes, my new friend, whose name unfortunately escapes me now, introduced me to a friend of hers who was also headed toward Portugal. She suggested I hitch a ride with him, saying hitchhiking was pretty common here. Apparently, people just went to a certain gas station outside Salamanca and caught a ride. She even offered to let me crash at her place, but by this point I was running on optimism and maybe a bit of travel madness, and I couldn't bear the thought of delaying any longer. So I weighed my options: trust a complete stranger or spend another night wondering if I would ever get to Portugal. I knew it was risky, but I had a gut feeling it would work out. So, with a touch of reckless optimism, I chose the ride. Sure, what could possibly go wrong? And there I was at some random gas station near Salamanca, fully committed to the adventure and clearly beyond the point of overthinking. My travel companion, let's just call him Miguel, was kindly asking around for someone headed toward Portugal. Finally, Miguel found a guy who offered to take me part way. He had just one spare seat, and Miguel, ever the gentleman, offered to wait with me if I wasn't comfortable going alone. But by this point, my patience was as broken as the wheel on my suitcase. I was all in. The driver, let's call him Antonio, looked about my parents' age and seemed friendly enough. Plus, his car had 4 wheels and running engine, so my standards were officially met. As I climbed in, I told myself, stay calm, don't imagine the worst. Antonio was nice. He was offering me food and coffee and trying to chat in a mix of Spanish and English, which kept us both entertained. Trying to sound cautious, I told him I was off to visit some friends in Portugal, which got me a concerned look from his when I casually mentioned that I met those friends online. Yes, I see the irony, I thought. Sir, I'm in your car at midnight. Clearly, safe isn't my priority right now. Then my phone rang. It was my camp leader, Paolo, finally checking in. Hearing a familiar voice, I announced, "Hey Paolo, I'm almost there. I'm in a car." He was not impressed. "You hitchhiked? Are you crazy?" To avoid the lecture from him, I quickly handed the phone to Antonio so Paolo could give him directions in Portuguese. After a quick chat, Antonio handed back my phone. He was reassuring me with a grin that he knew exactly where to go, even if it turned out to be 60 kilometers farther than I initially thought. By now, I'd come to expect the unexpected. As we drove through the dark, I realized this might be the most straightforward part of my journey. Antonio had that dad-like vibe, genuinely concerned for my safety, while I was just thrilled to be heading in the right direction. It wasn't until 2 a.m. that we finally reached the camp in a small village called Freixo do Numão. Population was 600. Everybody was there and they are up and celebrating just in time for me to join the party. And that, at last, was the end of my 60-plus hour journey to Portugal. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this journey with me. If you are curious about how I eventually made my way back from Portugal, be sure to join me in the next episode. Until then, take care and safe travels.